Good morning. The 84th Plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. The Assembly will consider sub-item B of Agenda Item 31, entitled Strengthening the Role of Mediation in the Peaceful Settlement of Disputes, Conflict Prevention and Resolution. I will now make a statement as the President of the General Assembly. Excellency, mediation lies at the very heart of our United Nations. The Charter makes it crystal clear. I quote, "The parties to any dispute shall first of all seek a solution by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, or other peaceful means of their own choice." Allow me to emphasize three key points in this regard. First, the General Assembly can and must continue to play a central role in strengthening mediation efforts in the light of the Charter, not least because it remains the world's most representative forum for dialogue and diplomacy. This role is clearly reflected in the Charter, which empowers the Assembly to make recommendations on matters related to peace and security, including the peaceful settlement of disputes. Second, we all know that mediation efforts and peace treaties last longer if women are at the table, as leaving half of the world outside will never lead to lasting peace and stabilization. Increasing women's participation as mediators, negotiators, and signatories is not only a women's issue, but in the security interest of all of us. Or to put it more sharply, the fact that women are entirely absent in many track 1 processes is a security threat to all. And third, we need political leaders to step up. Peace is not an abstract ideal, but peace does not happen by accident. It requires political will. It requires leaders and decision makers to choose dialogue over division, negotiation over violence, and long-term stability over short-term political gain. This becomes more and more difficult in a digitalized, social media-driven world, which has unfortunately shown us over and over again that there is no glory in prevention. Yet, as we are living in the real world, we also know that what makes mediation and peace talk these days so hard is not a lack of will from most member states, government, political leaders, and definitely not the majority of the people around the world, but the intentions of a selected few who believe they can shape the world through a process of might makes right. Because of this, peace requires a deep breath and patience to never give up, even in the darkest hour, even under the most severe pressure. And it requires a cross-regional alliance of those who are ready to defend the Charter of our United Nations every day, to increase global pressure on those who undermine peace talks and mediation efforts. Remembering that in situation of justice and injustice, we do not have the luxury of being bystanders. Staying silent means supporting the aggressor. As too often we speak about conflict as if it is inevitable. It is not. Every war, every ceasefire, and every peace agreement is ultimately shaped by human decisions, by leaders, by us. Decisions led society into conflict. Decisions lead us out. Political leaders have the power to prioritize peace by investing in mediation, by empowering actors at all levels, and by strengthening local and regional capacities to address disputes before they escalate and spread. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the credibility of mediation depends on trust, impartiality, and the consistent application of international law by all parties involved, and by the belief to never make it if we are doing it alone, but always remembering that we are better together. The question is not whether peace is possible. The question is whether we are willing to make it a priority by all. I thank you. Before proceeding further, as agreed in the General Committee meeting and announced in my letter dated May 20th, 2026, I propose that the time limit for statements in the debate on its item be 5 minutes for individual delegations speaking in their national capacity and 7 minutes for statements made on behalf of a group of states. Is there any objection to this proposal? I hear none. It is so decided. Accordingly, pursuant to Rule 72 of the Rules of Procedure of the Assembly, when a representative exceeds her or his allotted time, the President shall call the speaker to order without delay, which will be done by means of automatic microphone cutoff. To assist delegations in managing their time, a countdown clock will be displayed on the screens above. As we are doing it for formal sessions the first times, please again be aware that speaking time limits will be 5 minutes in national capacity and 7 minutes on behalf of a group. Please also be aware that the remaining speaking time for the speakers who come up is displayed on the left-hand side of the rostrum. Having said this, I now invite His Excellency Johann Wadefuhl, Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany, followed by the Minister of Kyrgyzstan and the Minister of Portugal. Please, sir, you have the floor.
Morning and moin. Madam President, can I first of all thank you for your excellent remarks in the beginning of this discussion this morning. Excellencies, resolving crisis requires staying power. Success is often the product of patient and devoted mediation, which today is needed more than ever before. For 3 years now, a brutal war has been raging in Sudan. It has resulted in the greatest humanitarian catastrophe of our time, with millions of people suffering. To help end this suffering, we convened representatives from 55 countries at the Berlin Sudan Conference in April. Together, we mobilized $1.7 billion in humanitarian assistance for Sudan, including $170 million from Germany alone. Sudanese civil society agreed on a joint call to end the war. States and international organizations reached agreement on the Berlin principles to guide a peaceful resolution of the conflict. This same spirit of sustained engagement has guided us in other crises. Haiti is facing a collapse of public security and a dramatic humanitarian situation. A Haitian-led political process is needed so that stability can return. Germany is among the largest donors supporting sustained efforts for peace and stability. Libya faces prolonged conflict marked by repeated breakdowns of ceasefire agreements. At the Berlin conferences, but Germany helped bring key international, regional, and Libyan stakeholders together within the framework of the United Nations. Not to impose solutions from the outside, but to create a space for diplomacy. Madam President, the aggression against Ukraine must stop. Last week, Russian drones hurt civilians in Romania. I condemn the ongoing Russian attacks against Ukraine and the war's implications for all other countries. International law must be respected by all. I could go on with many more examples, but I would instead to recall a promise we made when Germany joined the United Nations to work towards peace and stability, a promise that we keep. Our contributions to peacekeeping, peace building, and mediation efforts are making a difference. We are convinced that resilient civil societies and strong institutions are essential for addressing the root causes of conflict and for building lasting peace. We are also convinced that peace processes must be designed from the outset to be inclusive, with the effective participation of women and respecting the perspectives of young people. We share the stance that the then UN Secretary U Thant expressed 60 years ago. My conviction stands undiminished that the United Nations remains the best instrument by which nations may cooperate for the development and peace of their people. Therefore, we must support the United Nations with continued financial and political commitment. And we must make it more effective. Recently, here at the General Assembly, we witnessed that together we can make progress on climate justice. At the initiative of Vanuatu, the General Assembly adopted a landmark resolution that sent a strong signal. Climate change is not only an environmental challenge, but also a matter of international responsibility and law. We proudly supported these initiatives. Excellencies, friends, as you know, Germany is once again seeking a seat in the Security Council for the 2027-2028 term. We are doing so with a clear sense of responsibility, and we hope for your valuable support for our candidacy. We stand ready to continue to contribute to conflict prevention, mediation, and humanitarian action, not alone, but together with our partners. We are ready to deliver. Thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. I now give the floor to His Excellency Jebek Golobayev, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Kyrgyzstan.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the Kyrgyz Republic welcomes to convening of this important debate. At a time when conflicts are growing in number and the complexity, the role of mediation is more important than ever. Mediation helps prevent escalation. It saves lives, it builds trust, it opens the door to peace when the other channels are closed. Kyrgyzstan has a big experience of being mediator. For Kyrgyzstan, peaceful settlement of disputes is not only a principle of the UN Charter, it is also our own experience. In a country in the heart of Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan knows that even difficult and sensitive issues can be resolved through dialogue, patience, political will, and respect for international law. Our region has gone through a long and complex process of building trust, strengthening good neighborly relations, and resolving border-related questions by peaceful means. Today, Central Asia stands more united.
There is sometimes tension between short-term transactional deals to reduce violence and longer-term transformational peace processes. We must make sure that immediate stabilization does not undermine inclusive and sustainable peace. Madam President, Article 33 of the UN Charter guides parties to any dispute which we need closer cooperation with the regional organizations, we need dedicated member states and improved collaboration with specialized agencies. But we must also ensure that UN-led or supported mediation efforts remain anchored in international law and human rights, including gender equality, even when this may challenge powerful member states or risk limiting short-term diplomatic gains. Thank you.
Madam President, at the outset, I would like to thank the PG in 1945. The UN has been a cornerstone of the international peace architecture, and the mediation is one of the most effective tools we have at our disposal. The UN's unique ability to bring parties of the conflict together and consolidate mediation tracks by individual member states or regional actors. The Secretary General can create political support to empower the Secretary General to the UN's comparative advantage lies in its impartiality and the global mandate, which must be protected and strengthened. Latvia considers that the UN 80 initiative and the forthcoming review of UN peace operations provide a roadmap for adapting our tools to today's realities. Mediation efforts must evolve alongside these reforms. While genuine in-person engagement will always remain critical, technology can nurture mediation efforts. AI The UN Security Council holds a unique toolbox. For instance, political missions, early warning mechanisms, and unified messaging, among others. Yet these instruments political will, not mandates, determines whether these tools are used in time to make a difference. I would also like to highlight the importance of women and youth participation in mediation, in line with the Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, security, and the beyond UN 80 and the selection of the next Secretary General. We have a shared responsibility to give mediation the renewed momentum it deserves. Trust in the United Nations must be restored as the place where disputes are resolved peacefully. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Latvia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Romania.
Mediation has a central role and places a unique value in the United Nations. It is the embodiment of fundamental principles and purposes of the UN Charter. Peace mediation and preventive diplomacy are the expression of the endurance of the international community against all moving pieces and changes in the international community. There remains, however, one constant: the indispensable role of the United Nations in mediation, preventive diplomacy, and settlement of disputes. We see a good opportunity for consolidating UN action on this front in the context of the ongoing UN 80 initiative of the Secretary General. The good offices of the Secretary General have traditionally been one of the most successful instruments in advancing peace mediation and resolution. The review of special envoys is trust among different actors of the system. UN peace mediation is the avenue to pursue for the peaceful resolution of conflicts, with the UN Charter as both a legal and moral compass to guide mediation efforts. DPPA and the Mediation Support Unit are champions of peace across the world. We must continue to support and empower them to advance durable solutions to challenging crises. The UN has a central role in mediation, but not a monopoly. The most sound partnerships are forged together with other regional actors and institutions. Leveraging the full potential of such partnerships is a means of ensuring complementarity while adapting to new and emerging challenges and geopolitical trends. Romania has traditionally been a firm supporter of multilateralism and of advancing such partnerships. More than 20 years ago, Romania outside the framework of a cooperation mechanism between different stakeholders to promote and sustain international peace and stability. This is also important from an inclusivity and representativeness standpoint. Mediation works best when all parties recognize ownership over the results and outcomes. The inclusion of local communities, women and girls, vulnerable persons, and their fair representation in the solutions put forward are key to just, durable, and lasting conflict. Also needs to be prepared and equipped with the prerequisite abilities to navigate, together with other actors, the full breadth of options and formats to advance conflict resolution and the restoration of international peace and security. We are at a turning point, but it is indeed these challenging and complex times that the system is tested and can develop and further double down on our collective efforts to advance the core mission of the UN.
I thank the distinguished representative of Romania.
Madam President, Switzerland thanks Finland the United Nations often remains the only entity capable of preserving spaces for dialogue where few others can. Mediation is not a peripheral exercise of UN action, but lies at the very cannot be imposed from above. Sustainable solutions emerge when the parties themselves take ownership of both the process and the outcome. Secondly, on partnerships. In today's fragmented conflicts, no single actor has enough influence, legitimacy, or access to conduct mediation alone. They often possess the trust contextual knowledge and access that international actors lack. Finally, women play prevention. It is one of the most effective means of preserving peace and fulfilling the United Nations Charter's fundamental preventing or containing To be effective, mediation requires credible actors, expertise, as well as safe spaces that allow for discreet and constructive dialogue. In this regard, Geneva remains a unique platform, drawing on its multilateral so that Geneva may continue today and tomorrow to serve peace through dialogue and mediation. Thank you.
Madam President, we thank you for convening this important session. We also thank Turkey and Finland, our friends and co-chairs of the Group of Friends of Mediation, for requesting the convening of this meeting. The State of Qatar expresses its and reaffirms its firm conviction that mediation remains one of the most effective tools for the peaceful settlement of disputes mediation and the peaceful settlement of disputes constitute core pillars of its foreign policy. This is rooted in the principle enshrined in its constitution as well as in line of the purposes of the UN Charter and the implementation of relevant UN resolutions. Over more than 2 decades, Qatar has by Qatar alongside Egypt, the United States of America and Turkey to reach a ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, which was signed in October of last year. In this regard, Qatar stresses the necessity for all parties to fulfill their commitments, ensure the full implementation of the ceasefire agreement, refer to Qatar's mediation efforts in Afghanistan, which culminated in the signing of the peace agreement between the US and Taliban in Doha on the 29th of February 2020. Qatar Qatar also hosted the third meeting of the Working Group on counter narcotics and the second meeting of the Working Group on the private sector last July. In the context
Pakistan.
of the United Nations is not merely to respond to conflicts after they erupt, but to prevent them before they consume lives, regions, and generations. Madam President, which reaffirmed the centrality of Chapter 6, encouraged the effective use of mediation and good offices, and underscored the role of the United Nations, regional and sub-regional organizations in the peaceful settlement of disputes. And a return to diplomacy. As a friendly neighbor of Iran, a brotherly partner of the Gulf countries, and a country with long-standing ties of amity with the United States, Pakistan must invest more in early warning, quiet diplomacy, preventive engagement, the Secretary General's good offices, and the use of Chapter 6 before disputes lead to confrontation. The right to self-determination, normalization of foreign occupation, aggression, and the violation of treaties. Third, mediation must address root causes, and not just the predictable and adequate funding for the mediation support unit from the regular budget. United Nations may also strengthen partnerships with regional and sub-regional breakout. But how proactively we prevent them in the first place? Mediation is the bridge between confrontation and peace. Heart of our collective efforts for peaceful settlement, conflict prevention, and resolution. I thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Madam President, for convening this timely meeting. At a time of growing fragmentation, escalation of conflict, solutions. The United Nations Charter is quite clear in this regard: to promote dialogue, good offices, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. In order to work together with regional organizations and states and member states. Colombia recognizes, on the basis of our own experience, the value of mediation and international assistance. Our conviction, and that is that lasting political solutions rarely can be built in isolation. What they require is the willingness of the parties, credible mediation, and international support that is consistent over time. And as part of Colombia's presidency, and open up an area for reflection and action on how we can strengthen mediation efforts and good offices and political solutions in the light of the multiple crises that the region is encountering. Inclusive and sustainable mediation processes that are able to lead to a de-escalation of tensions, protect civilians, and build lasting peace in the world, and particularly in the Middle East. Thank you, Madam President. Today, the world is facing the highest number of armed conflicts since the establishment of the United Nations. This is a clear sign that Chapter 6 of the UN Charter is widely quoted but not sufficiently implemented. Is certainly lower than the use of military force in terms of human lives, suffering, destruction, effectiveness, and long-term consequences. In the context of the UN 80 initiative, it is of the committed to this important task as mandated by impartiality and integrity required by the role. This direct engagement, whether public or more discreetly, is of the utmost importance in diffusing tension. And this is why, in selecting the next Secretary General, we have the responsibility to choose a candidate who is up to the task. With this in mind, Brazil, together with Mexico, has presented Michelle for our times. Not to mention that it is past time that we choose a female leadership for the SG post. The General Assembly is equally a key stakeholder in the prevention and peaceful settlement of disputes. Articles 12 and 14 of the UN Charter establish its authority to discuss fair or friendly relations among nations. Through its emergency special sessions and relevant resolutions, the General Assembly has had a decisive influence both in the prevention of conflict as well as in the settlement of disputes. The landmark 1982 Manila Declaration on the Peaceful Settlement of Disputes also highlights its role in fostering peaceful solutions. Colleagues, in the UN Charter, the international community has a toolkit for the peaceful settlement of disputes. What we need is political resolve to make use of these tools in times of crisis. We also need to choose a new leadership for the organization that has the experience and the necessary authority to ensure that peace is always attainable when political wisdom prevails. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Madam President, I thank you for convening today's plenary session. Today's discussions not only bring the focus on this important theme, but also remind us of the foundational reason for the establishment of the United Nations. The UN was built on the ravages of the Second World War. It was a reflection of the world's desire for lasting peace. Legitimacy, credibility, and efficacy of this organization are assessed primarily on the basis of its ability have not been sufficiently impactful. Raging conflicts in different parts of the world and the immeasurable human suffering bear testimony. Against this backdrop, I would like to make the following points. First, the UN Charter offers a repertoire of options to address disputes. None of these options have universal applicability. The context must be an important consideration in identifying the best approach. Second, national ownership is a key parameter. External solutions must not be imposed. Actions must be governed by consensus. Third, these are powerful tools that could forge desirable and mutually acceptable outcomes in diverse settings. Fourth, the international peace and security landscape is dynamic and ever-changing. There are growing complexities that the UN is agile and equipped to deal with contemporary and future challenges. Finally, the UN must mirror today's geopolitical realities to be fit for purpose. As the principal organ with the onerous task of maintenance of international peace and security, UN Security Council's 8-decade-old architecture is clearly outdated and not designed to handle issues of the times we live in. India, with unwavering faith in multilateralism, stands ready to contribute towards working for peace, security, and prosperity of all. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
At the outset, I would like to thank Madam President of the General Assembly for convening this timely debate and the co-chairs of the Group of Friends of Mediation, Finland and Turkey, for their continued efforts. We align ourselves to the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union. We meet at a time of many wars and very few peace processes. In too many places, there is no real prospect for peace, and the space for diplomacy is shrinking. Pact for the Future, move towards the implementation of UN 80, and approach the selection of the next Secretary General, we have a real opportunity to recalibrate our expectations and strengthen the UN's role in mediation. Mediation should be treated as a core UN function, not an add-on. The Mediation Support Unit and its standby team of senior mediation advisors are essential assets in this context. Mediation should also be high on the agenda of all candidates for Secretary General. We need a Secretary General who sees mediation as a strategic tool for prevention and conflict resolution, who is ready to invest personal political capital in difficult talks, who is also focusing on mediation as a link to justice, human rights, and inclusion. Now, allow me also to turn to what the Netherlands is doing to advance this agenda. The Netherlands is a proud member We commit to better coordination and more strategic use of diplomatic tools. Our mediation approach rests on three key pillars. First, strong and predictable support to the United Nations. The Netherlands has been one of the top financial contributions and contributors to the UN political work. We're a long-standing donor to the DPPA multi-year appeal with largely unearmarked contributions. This allows DPPA to rapidly deploy mediators, sustain field offices, and support political solutions, including through its mediation support unit and standby team. We're also among the top donors to the Peacebuilding Fund, which acts as a financial engine for mediation and dialogue initiatives on the ground. Second, as the Netherlands, we have identified two specific niches If we want them to become more than temporary pauses in violence, we must also address the deeper drivers of conflict. As the Netherlands, we stand firm in the belief that peacemaking must address grievances, exclusion, trauma, and injustice. On water, we see how political and social dynamics can turn water into a driver of conflict or of cooperation. We therefore must invest in water diplomacy to navigate shared water challenges through dialogue and building inclusive water governance that addresses inequality and exclusion.
Third and lastly, structured collaboration between states, civil society, and communities. We need to align strategies, share analysis, and combine diplomatic capital with the access and expertise of mediation institutes and diplomats, and we work to support mediation processes, including with the tools of the rules-based international order. Excellencies, colleagues, as a member state, we can and must combine political commitment, predictable funding, strong partnerships, and investment in UN capacity and international law. The Kingdom of the Netherlands stands ready to work with all of you to place mediation where it belongs.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, distinguished colleagues, we would like to begin by thanking the facilitators, Turkey, we welcome the fact that this meeting represents an opportunity after nearly a decade to bring peace mediation back to the agenda of this assembly, as well as preventive diplomacy. The pacifist vocation of Uruguay is a legal and concrete commitment based on unwavering respect for international law, the sovereign equality of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. In 1921, we were the first country to accept the jurisdiction of the Permanent Court of International Justice, maintaining that force never creates rights. In 2025, we launched our Uruguay Promoter of Peace policy, seeking to strengthen our capacities in the area of mediation, dialogue facilitation, and preventive diplomacy. With its robust institutional stability and international trustworthiness, Uruguay offers its services to the international community as an honest facilitator and a builder of bridges, and does so humbly, convinced that dialogue is the most effective tool to de-escalate tensions before violence erupts or deepens. We take on this responsibility through various roles. We currently hold the chairmanship of the G77 in China, CELAC, and the Brasilia Consensus, multilateral fora where we advocate for peaceful, inclusive, and consensual solutions, recognizing the value of regional alliances for mediation. This effort to bolster stability extends across our region of Latin America and the Caribbean, which we must preserve as a zone of peace in the broadest sense. In the face of fragmented mediations or merely transactional ones, revitalizing the central coordinating role of the UN is more necessary than ever. In the context of the UN 80 initiative and the upcoming selection of the next Secretary General, we urge member states to reaffirm the essential role of our organization. We must ensure that mediation processes address and resolve the root causes of conflicts, such as inequality, socioeconomic exclusion, and the impact of climate change, among others, and that they are not limited solely to precarious ceasefires. Likewise, we reaffirm the importance of the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, construction of a lasting peace. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Friends of mediation for convening this important session.
peace mediation remains one of the most essential instruments available for the peaceful settlement of disputes, prevention of armed conflict, and the preservation of international peace and security in line with the UN Charter. Mediators today operate in an increasingly complex global environment defined by a troubling erosion of the norms and institutions that once constrained the use of force and the rise of transactional diplomacy that undermines confidence in multilateral conflict resolution mechanisms. The state increase in global military expenditure to 2.9 trillion US dollars in 2025, while the entire UN Peace and Security Bureau operates on under $1 billion US dollars, underscores the continuous prioritization of conflict preparation over conflict prevention. Excellencies, Kenya believes that the lasting peace and stability is built through inclusive dialogue, political compromise, mutual trust, accountability, and the shared determination of conflicting parties to resolve their differences through negotiation rather than force. We have been actively engaged in supporting regional peace efforts, including through the East African Community-led Peace Nairobi process for Eastern DRC, the Tumaini Initiative on South Sudan, the IGAD-led efforts on Sudan, and the African Union initiatives in northern Ethiopia. On the willingness of conflicting parties to prioritize political accommodation over military confrontation. We observed that mediation must begin with realistic and immediate priorities that consider the urgent imperative to reduce human suffering while preserving the political space necessary for a more sustainable settlement over time. In our experience, mediation operations. Excellencies, as we reflect on the future of peace and peace mediation, Kenya encourages the international community to recommit to preventive diplomacy and act engagement must become central pillars of our collective peace architecture. We also call for greater investment in the capabilities of mediators, including training, institutional support, and legitimize international peace efforts, and reiterates our full support for the Secretary General's efforts to advance mediation, dialogue, and peaceful conflict resolutions. I thank you all.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
President, we welcome the convening of this important and timely debate. Ireland strongly supports mediation as an essential tool for conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and sustaining lasting peace. At a moment of increasing geopolitical tension, protracted conflict, and growing challenges to international law and multilateralism, we reaffirm our commitment to inclusive and locally grounded mediation. In the context of ongoing UN 80 reform discussions, we must ensure that the United Nations remains equipped and adequately resourced so that it can respond effectively to evolving peace and security challenges while upholding the principles and the values of the UN Charter. Ireland strongly supports the central role of the United Nations in peace mediation efforts, and we commend the efforts of the Secretary-General, his special representatives and envoys, the Department of Political and Peace-Building Affairs, including the Mediation Support Unit, and the Department of Peace Operations. We also recognise the crucial role of regional organisations, member states, and local actors in supporting complementary mediation efforts grounded in local realities. President, Ireland's commitment to mediation is informed by our own experience of conflict resolution in the Northern Ireland peace process. Supporting sustained peace building and reconciliation remains a core element of Ireland's foreign and development policies. The Good Friday Peace Agreement was anchored in political agreement, popular support, inclusivity, equality, human rights, and international law, and these are the principles that continue to guide Ireland today. We know from bitter experience that dialogue, political courage, inclusive engagement, and sustained international support can help transform conflict and build lasting peace. Effective mediation must therefore be inclusive at all stages. Ireland has long championed the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and we recognise both the disproportionate impact of conflict on women and girls and their indispensable role in peace building. Women's full, equal and meaningful participation is essential to building sustainable peace. At a time of alarming levels of armed conflict and setbacks in gender equality globally, implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda is more urgent than ever. We welcome the growing emphasis on the participation of women and youth in peace processes, and we stress that mediation efforts must reflect the diversity of women's experiences, including women with disabilities, youth and members of the LGBTQI community. We also underline the importance of engaging local actors and supporting dialogue processes rooted in local leadership. Mediation efforts should be coordinated and complementary in order Madam President, as conflicts become more complex and more interconnected, the UN must continue to strengthen its mediation capacities and partnerships while remaining firmly anchored in the principles of the UN Charter.
Thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Turkey for convening today's important debate. As a proud member of this group of friends, Malta welcomes this opportunity to reaffirm its strong support for mediation as an essential instrument for conflict prevention, de-escalation, peaceful resolution, and the advancement of peace. For my country, mediation is not simply a tool of last resort. It is a practical expression of the and be adequately equipped to respond to today's challenges. This requires stronger cooperation among UN member states and enhanced capacity for the UN to serve as an effective mediator. In the context of the UN80 initiative, Malta reaffirms the importance of strengthening the UN's mediation capacity and advancing effective No two conflicts are identical. Each country brings its own history, cultural sensitivities, and degrees of societal polarization that must be taken into account. Malta strongly believes that regional and sub-regional organizations have a unique and indispensable role to play in the peaceful settlement of the NGOs and civil society in mediation, particularly in engaging non-state parties and ensuring that all sides feel included in the process. Central to effective mediation is the role of women. Women's full, equal and safe participation in mediation is not optional. It is mandated. Of peace processes and supports the development of more comprehensive, innovative and sustainable solutions that contribute to lasting peace. Young people are also among those most affected by conflict, yet they are also key agents of positive change and peace building. The Youth, Peace and Security Agenda affirms the important role of young people in preventing and resolving conflict and calls for their meaningful inclusion in peace processes, including mediation. Their grassroots perspectives enrich negotiations and contribute to more inclusive and sustainable peace outcomes. Madam President, the state of our world today makes the case for mediation unmistakable. Effective mediation requires strong political will, continuous dialogue, and sustained diplomatic engagement. Malta believes that multilateralism remains indispensable to addressing conflict and shared challenges, fostering trust among nations, and upholding a rules-based international order grounded in the principles of the United Nations Charter. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
السيدة الرئيس أشكر
Madam President, I thank you for organizing this important meeting, which is taking place at a delicate time when the international order is facing profound and multidimensional changes. Our world is witnessing multiple crises that are worsening simultaneously while trust among states continues to erode increasingly. At the same time, the United Nations is undergoing unprecedented tests overall, as well as the entire multilateral system. In this context, mediation is no longer merely an option. It has become an urgent necessity. Mediation remains one of the most effective tools for preventing conflicts, putting an end to violence, and avoiding humanitarian tragedies. Today, given the increase in the outbreak of conflicts and their ever more complex nature, particularly in the Middle East and Africa, allow me to highlight the following key points. Firstly, traditional approaches to conflict resolution have demonstrated their limitations in terms of effectiveness. The gap between the outbreak of conflicts and achieving their settlement continues to widen at an alarming rate. However, the UN Charter, particularly Chapter 6 of that Charter, provides a clear framework for the peaceful settlement of disputes, establishing it as a fundamental obligation incumbent upon states. It is therefore incumbent upon all of us to fully respect this commitment. Secondly, the most pressing challenge that we face today lies in the erosion of trust. Without trust, no agreement can endure. Rebuilding trust requires renewed commitment to the United Nations Charter. It requires respect for international law and the equal application of rights and obligations to all. Thirdly, sustainable peace must address the root causes of conflicts, particularly inequality, exclusion, and unresolved historical grievances. Peace agreements that fail to earnestly address these fundamental realities may achieve only temporary stability and ultimately lead to a return to violence. Fourthly, no mediation efforts can succeed in isolation. The ownership by regional actors and their effective participation in mediation initiatives remain essential. Regional organizations possess the expertise and knowledge necessary to support lasting and sustainable solutions to conflicts. The African Union, through its structures dedicated to peace and security, embody this approach, reflecting and promoting the principle of African solutions to African problems. Madam President, Algeria's engagement in mediation efforts is not a matter of circumstance, much rather it is a constant, deeply rooted and established choice in its foreign policy, grounded in the principles of international legitimacy. Algeria has played important roles in the peaceful settlement of numerous international and regional disputes. Algeria has supported dialogue during periods of heightened tension, and we've also contributed to historic peace processes within our region and beyond. In conclusion, Algeria calls upon all member states to remain committed to the United Nations Charter, to strengthen the peaceful settlement of disputes, and to invest in mediation as a fundamental pillar of international peace and stability. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Madam President, I wish to express my gratitude to Finland and Turkey for their leadership as co-chairs of the group of friends of mediation to which Japan proudly belongs. We are currently witnessing shifting power dynamics among major nations and an increasing number of conflicts and tensions across the globe. In these challenging times, a proactive approach to sustaining peace is essential. A key component of this effort is mediation, which offers a path towards peaceful resolution. This past March, Japan newly established the International Peace Mediation Unit within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This unit is to be actively engaged with counterparts from various countries, fostering relationships and accumulating practical knowledge. In this regard, Japan places great importance on a long-term commitment to sustainable peace. Our approach is deeply rooted in the concept of human security, through which we have provided capacity-building support for countries to build resilient institutions focused on people. Mediation efforts should be advanced in parallel with such long-term support, as both are essential and mutually reinforcing in the pursuit of sustainable peace. Even as the United Nations undergoes necessary reforms and re-evaluations of its mandate, the pursuit of peaceful settlement of disputes, including mediation, as enshrined in the Chapter 6 of the UN Charter, must remain a core function of this organization. We believe the Secretary General should leverage his good offices more actively in mediation and preventive diplomacy, a call that was also reaffirmed in the Pact for the Future. Japan remains committed to contributing to global peace and stability through robust international cooperation. We believe that by strengthening our collective capacity for mediation and preventive diplomacy, we can contribute to building a more peaceful and better world. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Madam President, we thank Finland and Turkey for organizing this important debate. With so many conflicts persisting and emerging across the globe, the importance of mediation cannot be overstated. Early and effective political and diplomatic engagement remains our best tool for preventing and resolving them. My country, Poland, as a strong supporter of the peace-building settlement of disputes, is firmly convinced that the international community must sharpen its focus on prevention, including robust mediation capacities. For this reason, we support the central role of the United Nations in peace mediation and value the important contribution of the Peacebuilding Commission. Madam President, making full use of the United Nations diplomatic toolbox, including the Secretary General's good offices, is more important than ever. We therefore expect the next Secretary General to be an experienced mediator and a crisis manager. Strong leadership grounded in the UN Charter and supported by committed member states is what will keep the United Nations effective and in the service of peace. We also wish to underscore the need for more consistent Security Council support for the Secretary General's mediation initiatives. The Council must effectively and actively champion peaceful solutions, whether through mediation, negotiations, conciliation, or arbitration. In this context, we reaffirm that it is wholly unacceptable for any member of the Security Council, and especially its permanent members, entrusted with the responsibility to uphold international peace, to violate the sovereignty of the other states. Yet today, this is the very principle of mediation. Equal, impartial engagement in a peaceful settlement of conflicts is under serious threat. Some UN members seek to restore a concert of great powers and to reinstate spheres of influence, to revive subjugation and dependence, and to resurrect the logic of old empires. In doing so, they openly undermine the multilateral system born from the devastation of the Second World War. This cannot be accepted. Madam President, in closing, Poland firmly believes that conflict prevention and mediation are among the most powerful tools we have, capable of tackling the underlying drivers of instability before they spiral into the violence. Effective prevention saves lives and resources. But it only works if all UN member states stand behind it, not just in rhetoric, but in genuine commitment to the principles of the UN Charter. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Djibouti.
Madam President, Djibouti expresses its gratitude to you as well as the co-chairs, Finland and Turkey, for convening this timely plenary debate on strengthening the role of mediation in the peaceful settlement of disputes, conflict prevention, and resolution. This dialogue could not have come at a better time. It's an opportunity to assess the impact of Resolution 7304 as adopted on September the 9th, 2016, which no doubt has made significant progress in spite of enduring challenges. Resolution 70/304, which was well grounded in the UN Charter, Article 33, moved mediation away from being a supplementary effort on diplomatic interaction towards being a central pillar in the operations of our organization. The Secretary General's good offices, the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, the Mediation Support Unit, regional envoys, special representatives, standby experts, and the Peacebuilding Fund constitute impressive architecture for preventive diplomacy and mediation. However, the significant resources at the disposal of the United Nations are largely emasculated in today's geopolitical realities. Early warning capacities, we have learned, do not imply early action. Continued political divisions among external actors, which incentivize zero-sum calculations, constrain early action, and make the prospect of peace increasingly dim. Madam President, to reverse this trend, several steps deserve urgent consideration. First, we must continue to emphasize and improve preventive diplomacy at the centerpiece of the United Nations Peace and Security Agenda. Second, member states should provide determined and stronger political support for mediators and special envoys. Fourth, under-resourced mediation efforts often fail to produce the expected outcome. Therefore, finance should not be a challenge to mediation efforts, whether by the UN or regional organizations. Fifth, perhaps the most visible achievement since 2016 has been the stronger emphasis on women's inclusion in mediation and peace processes. However, progress is still slow. Sixth, the United Nations must deepen cooperation with regional and sub-regional organizations. Despite setbacks and continued challenges, regional organizations have done comparatively better on mediation. Regional actors indeed possess unique insights, proximity, and legitimacy. Seventh, mediation must adapt to contemporary challenges. Today's conflicts increasingly involve non-state armed groups, terrorist organizations, criminal networks, climate-related pressures, and transnational dimensions that were less prominent in earlier decades. Mediation involving non-state actors presents unique political, legal, and operational challenges. The United Nations should continue strengthening the expertise and flexibility of its mediation mechanisms to respond to these evolving challenges. The United Nations should also seek to build constructive coalitions to help manage geopolitical rivalry among external actors. Sustainable peace is achieved when mediation places the security, dignity, and aspirations of the people at the center of the peace process while accommodating the legitimate interest of external actors. Madam President, Djibouti strongly supports mediation. Under the leadership of President Gele, we have been engaged in determined efforts with our sub-regional partners in the Horn of Africa to move mediation between theoretical levels. The United Nations was established to prevent wars. Mediation remains the organization's most valuable instrument for fulfilling that mission. The challenge before us is to ensure that this instrument is employed more consistently, more courageously, and more effectively. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Djibouti. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia.
Madam President, Georgia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and would like to add the following remarks in the national capacity. Madam President, from Georgia's perspective, mediation should be fair, credible, and grounded in international law. At the same time, mediation should not blur the distinction between a state that violates human rights and international law and a state that is subjected to such violations. Partiality should not ignore the facts on the ground. Georgia's experience demonstrates both the value and the limitations of mediation. The Geneva International Discussions remain the only international format in which Georgia and Russia discussed the consequences of the 2008 war, which left hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons and refugees unable to return to their homes and properties. We believe that this format should be maintained, strengthened, and focused on delivering tangible results. Mediation is most effective when it is followed by implementation. Agreements and commitments should not remain merely on paper. In Georgia's case, key provisions of the 12th August 2008 ceasefire agreement remain unimplemented. Confidence-building measures and local dialogue are important, particularly for conflict-affected communities. Mechanisms such as the incident prevention and response mechanism help address practical humanitarian and security concerns. However, confidence-building measures alone cannot substitute for efforts aimed at achieving a lasting political solution. In addition, the meaningful participation of women in mediation processes is essential to ensuring more inclusive, sustainable, and effective outcomes. Madam President, justice is an essential element of conflict resolution. Mediation can help parties engage in dialogue and reduce tensions, but lasting peace is difficult to achieve when serious violations of international law remain unaddressed. In this regard, the work of international judicial and accountability mechanisms, including the European Court of Human Rights and the International Criminal Court, can complement mediation efforts by establishing facts, ensuring accountability, and clarifying responsibilities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Georgia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Madam Vice President, Excellencies, Timor-Leste welcomes this debate at a time when the international security system faces sustained pressure. Protracted conflicts, delayed diplomacy, and institutional deadlock continue to impose high human and economic costs. Timor-Leste speaks from direct experience in conflict resolution and state building. Mediation is not secondary or symbolic tool. It is primary instrument for conflict prevention, dispute settlement, and the maintenance of international legal order when applied early, inclusively, and within rules-based framework. Effective mediation depends on three conditions: factual clarity, inclusive participation, and respect for state sovereignty. Without this, processes lose credibility and durability. Timor-Leste's experience showed that mediation can operate across four interconnected levels. First, at the grassroots level. Following the 1999 crisis, local communities applied Nahibiti Boat, a customary dispute resolution mechanism. This process resolved over 1,000 cases involving property disputes, community tensions, and acts of violence. Second, at the national level, the Commission for Reception, Truth, and Reconciliation, which was mandated to address the 20-year conflict in Timor-Leste, provided a structured platform for addressing past violations. Third, at the bilateral level, Timor-Leste and Indonesia established the Commission of Truth and Friendship to address responsibility for past violence. Fourth, at the international level, Timor-Leste engaged Australia through compulsory conciliation under United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which enabled agreement on permanent maritime boundary. These examples demonstrate that mediation is scalable, adaptable, and compatible with formal legal processes. Its effectiveness increases when deployed early and supported by institutional consistency. Based on these experiences, Timor-Leste proposes three priorities for member states. First, early deployment. Mediation mechanism should be activated before dispute escalate into armed conflict, requiring political will and institutional triggers within the United Nations system. Second, integration of local mechanism. Peace processes should incorporate community-based mediation structures where they exist to enhance legitimacy, compliance, and sustainability. Third, legal anchoring. Mediation must operate within international law, reinforcing rather than bypassing legal norms, particularly for smaller or more vulnerable states. Excellencies, the international community must now translate these principles into concrete actions. Timor-Leste calls upon member states to mandate systemic early deployment of mediation capacities within the United Nations to allocate predictable and sustained resources for mediation support, to strengthen institutional linkages between local, national, and international mediation efforts. We further urge member states to reaffirm their commitment to international legal frameworks by utilizing existing mechanisms, including conciliations and arbitration, as viable pathways for dispute resolution. These steps are necessary to restore confidence in multilateralism and to prevent the escalation of disputes into protracted conflict. Timor-Leste stands ready to work with all partners to advance these priorities and to contribute its experience to the development of practical, result-oriented mediation strategies. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Hungary.
Madam President, Hungary aligns itself with the statement delivered by the EU and reaffirms with conviction the indispensable role of mediation as a tool for the peaceful settlement of disputes and welcomes today's debate on mediation convened by Turkey and Finland. We live in an era of growing geopolitical fragmentation and a moment of acute global anxiety. Armed conflicts rage on multiple continents. Trust between states is becoming a scarce commodity. The multilateral architecture constructed after the Second World War faces unprecedented pressure. The credibility of the multilateral system will increasingly be judged by our collective ability not only to how to react to wars, but to prevent them. At a time of profound uncertainty, the Charter of the United Nations remains our collective compass, and we must get back to basics. The peaceful settlement of disputes, where mediation is a demonstration of strategic responsibility. Madam President, history has shown repeatedly that conflicts left unmediated become longer, costlier, and more deadly. The human toll of delay is never abstract. It is measured in lives lost, families displaced, and generations scared. It is precisely for this reason that the multilateral framework of the UN, with its unique legitimacy, its global reach, and its accumulated experience, remain the most appropriate setting to bring parties together and sustain the difficult work of mediation. Mediation and conflict prevention is the best way to protect future generations from the scourge of war. We encourage the use of the Secretary General's good offices to prevent and mediate conflicts. Sustainable peace cannot be imposed from the outside. Mediation processes must be locally owned and must include all relevant parties. At the same time, mediation must adapt to contemporary realities. Today's conflicts are increasingly complex, involving regional dimensions, non-state actors, disinformation, and the growing impact of emerging technologies. The United Nations must therefore continue strengthening its mediation capacities, including through early warning, preventive diplomacy, and closer cooperation with regional and sub-regional actors. Madam President, Hungary has a deep interest in a stable, rules-based international order. We have seen in our own region what happens when disputes go unresolved and dialogue breaks down. Dialogue must begin early, remain continuous, and be supported with genuine political will from the international community. We cannot afford to treat mediation as a last resort, something to consider only after violence has already taken hold. It must be a priority, proactive, preventive, and principled. Hungary stands ready to contribute to international mediation efforts in partnership with the United Nations and all member states committed to the peaceful resolution of disputes. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Hungary. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bulgaria.
Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union and wishes to add the following remark in national capacity. At a time of geopolitical tensions, crisis, and polarization, mediations remains one of the most effective and cost-efficient tools available to international community for the peaceful settlement of disputes, conflict prevention, and sustainable peace building. The Pact for the Future provides a strong political framework for reinvigorating multilateralism, strengthening preventive diplomacy, and improving the capacity of the United Nations to address contemporary security challenges. Mediation must remain at the center of these efforts. Bulgaria supports a stronger, more coordinated and better resourced UN mediation architecture. We believe that closer cooperation between the United Nations regional and sub-regional organizations and member states directly engaged in mediation efforts is essential. Regional organizations bring political leverage, regional ownership, and local expertise that are indispensable for effective mediation and conflict prevention. Bulgaria has consistently supported UN mediation and conflict prevention efforts, including through voluntary financial contributions to the UN Mediation Trust Fund in support of the mediation and good offices activities in the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs in the Western Balkans in recent years. Bulgaria also supported financially the work of this department of the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. My country also actively contributes to the strengthening of the humanitarian development peace nexus through support of UN humanitarian activities in a number of crisis-affected regions. We welcome the work of the Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation, as well as the important role of the UN Group of Friends of Mediation in promoting awareness of mediation as a vital tool for preventing and resolving armed conflicts. Bulgaria will continue to actively support these initiatives. We underline, Madam President, the importance of inclusive mediation processes. The meaningful participation of women and youth is essential for building durable and legitimate peace. Bulgaria remains firmly committed to Women, Peace and Security Agenda and to advancing the relevant commitments contained in the Pact for the Future. In this context, the UN80 initiative provides a timely opportunity to strengthen mediation and preventive diplomacy as core function of the United Nations. As the organization adapts to contemporary global realities, mediation should be viewed as a strategic investment in international peace and security, in restoring confidence in multilateralism. The discussions under UN80 framework should therefore focus on enhancing institutional support for mediation, improving coordination across the UN system, and ensuring adequate and predictable resources for preventive action. UN80 also offers an opportunity to reflect on how the organization can better use its legitimacy, convening power, and field presence to support inclusive and sustainable mediation efforts worldwide. Bulgaria also believes that continuity and institutional memory within UN mediation system are of importance, especially during leadership transitions within the organization. In this regard, the forthcoming selection of the next Secretary General offers an important moment to reaffirm our collective expectation for a proactive, credible, and effective UN role in mediation and preventive diplomacy. Bulgaria will continue to support all efforts aimed at strengthening international peace and security through dialogue, diplomacy, and mediation, in full accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bulgaria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Madam President, Mexico, as a member of the Group of Friends of Mediation, recognizes Finland and Turkey and thanks them for inviting us to this timely and necessary debate, given the alarming escalation of global tensions and actions that could be serious threats to humanity. In adherence to our political constitution, Mexico historically has spoken out in favor of preventing conflicts and in favor of the peaceful settlement of disputes. Mexico is firmly convinced that Strengthening the role of the organization depends on an effective use of the tools provided under Chapter 6 of its charter, particularly with regard to the peaceful settlement of disputes, and particularly mediation and active participation in negotiations. In order to respond effectively to the complex current challenges, the role of member states and of international organizations in the area of mediations must develop and adapt to the changing nature of conflicts, as well as the increase in the number and diversity of actors on the ground. Over and above traditional patterns when it comes to mediation, what we need today is to use broad multidimensional approaches that are inclusive as well as innovative, in addition to being effective to create conditions that will lead to lasting peace. This being the situation, we support the new Agenda for Peace, which proposes a more strategic use of the United Nations as the central place for international diplomacy. It must be consolidated as an essential platform where member states cooperate together, including in situations where there is a lack of mutual recognition. We have insisted that this organization should play a leading role as a guarantor and negotiator of peace. The absence of the United Nations at the main negotiating tables will not lead to peace. The legitimacy of the organization means that we have to act above individual geopolitical interests and ensure the principle of legal equality between all states, and at the same time see peace as a public good, focusing on people. The UN 80 initiative contains activities that will lead to the strengthening of mediation as an important part of that reform under the pillar of peace and international security. We'd also call upon the next Secretary General, who we hope will be the former President of Chile and a candidate nominated by Brazil and Mexico, Michelle Bachelet. We hope that, first of all, they will renew good offices that will help in peace negotiations. Secondly, strengthen preventive diplomacy to ensure the effective participation of the organization in those negotiations, and promote measures that will involve all parties and increase trust. So Mexico would like to focus on the mandates of the representatives of the special envoys, for example, of the Secretary General. The mediation tools should increase the level of participation and help the organization to work together with regional organizations, particularly in the area of preventive diplomacy and early warning system. For peace to be lasting and inclusive, we must ensure that we include women and young people in peace processes, including in mediation and negotiation. In that regard, Mexico works together with 11 countries in our region, working together with women to promote the participation of women in mediation and in the peaceful settlement of disputes, as well as in peace building. We continue to reassess mediation and preventive diplomacy at all levels, with the firm conviction that we must always place people at the heart of our actions. You can count on Mexico's support to make progress towards this noble goal. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Madam President, we meet at a time of deep global strain. Conflict is more widespread than at any point since the Second World War. While military power expands, the mechanisms to constrain violence have not kept pace. We must renew our collective effort to break this cycle and strengthen the role of mediation in the peaceful settlement of disputes. And there is no place more vital to that task than the United Nations. Founded on the principle that peace is built by many, not just the powerful. First, prevention must be our top priority. Acting only after violence escalates is too late and too costly. We need stronger early warning systems, earlier action, and closer coordination across the UN, regional organisations and member states to address risks before they become crises. Second, mediation must be strengthened and sustained. Peace requires trust, dialogue, and inclusive processes. We must equip mediators with the mandate and resources they need, and ensure women, youth, and civil society are fully included. Regional organisations, like ASEAN in our Indo-Pacific region, play a central role and must remain essential partners in this effort. Third, we must protect the foundations of peace. This includes supporting rules and institutions that uphold accountability, dialogue, and stability, even in times of tension. And while we make all efforts to prevent conflict, Australia is also taking action to protect those who protect others in conflict. This is not optional, it is essential, as recognised by the 112 member states who have signed the Declaration on the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel. Mediation is not a single act, it is a long-term commitment. Australia stands ready to work with all member states to prevent conflict, build peace, and uphold human dignity. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nepal.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Today, the world is confronted with the highest number of the conflicts since the end of the Second World War. From protracted civil wars to renewed interstate confrontations, the global peace and security landscape is under unprecedented strain. At the same time, trust in multilateral cooperation is eroding, making it harder for the international community to respond with unity, with consistency, and with resolve. Peaceful means of dispute settlement, including mediations, have therefore become more important and more necessary than ever. Mediation offers one of the most effective multilateral tools at our disposal for preventing conflicts, for de-escalating tensions, for fostering dialogue and resolving disputes through peaceful means. Excellencies, the UN Charter is unequivocal in its obligations upon states to settle their disputes by peaceful means. Yet, we have not been able to fully utilize the full potential of mediations as a preventive and confidence-building tool. Nor have we consistently invested in the capacities required to deploy it at scale and on time. In this context, Madam President, allow me to highlight 4 key messages. First, we must reaffirm our full commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, negotiations, and mediations as the primary tools for the peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter. Second, we must give priority to preventive diplomacy and the strengthening of early warning and conflict prevention mechanisms. For this, it is incumbent upon us to strengthen the United Nations capacity for preventive diplomacy and mediations by ensuring political, technical, and financial support so as to enable it to respond swiftly and effectively. Third, we must ensure that mediation's efforts are inclusive and representative, engaging women's, youths, and local communities while addressing the root causes of conflict and advancing equal opportunities, dignity, and peaceful coexistence for all. Advancing genuinely inclusive mediation processes enhances the legitimacy, durability, and overall effectiveness of negotiated outcomes. Fourth, fostering a stronger partnership between the United Nations and regional and sub-regional organizations is essential for leveraging regional expertise, for deepening local ownership, for strengthening complementarity, and for promoting shared responsibilities. Madam President, Nepal reaffirms its unwavering faith on the values of peace, preventive diplomacy, and mediations at home and globally. Our own nationally led and own peace process exemplifies the transformative power of dialogue, consensus building, and mediations in overcoming the conflict and advancing sustainable peace. In closing, Madam President, reaffirming the UN-led peace mediations is not merely a policy choice. It is a charter obligations, and it is a strategic necessity to uphold the peaceful settlement of disputes, advance dialogue over confrontations, and to ensure that conflicts are resolved in accordance with international law. Let us therefore fully harness the power of dialogue, power of diplomacy, and power of mediations to bridge divides, to restore trust, and to chart pathways towards lasting and sustainable peace. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Madam President, thank you for convening this important debate at the General Assembly on mediation. Egypt believes that mediation is not merely a tool for managing crises after they erupt, but rather a fundamental pillar of preventive diplomacy and addressing the root causes that lead to the outbreak or recurrence of conflicts. In a world witnessing an unprecedented rise in armed conflicts and humanitarian crises, there is an increasing need to strengthen political, institutional, and financial investment in mediation efforts at the national, regional, and international levels. The success of mediation efforts requires first and foremost respect for the fundamental principles of the UN Charter, especially the respect for sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of states, non-interference in their domestic affairs, and ensuring national ownership of the political process. Effective mediation cannot be imposed from the outside. Rather, it must be based on the will of the concerned parties and take into account the national and regional context specific to each conflict. Egypt also stresses the importance of strengthening partnerships between the UN and regional and sub-regional organizations, as these entities possess a deeper understanding of local realities and of political, social, and cultural dynamics within their regions. In this regard, the importance of enhancing cooperation between the UN and the AU stands out, building on the comparative advantages of each in a manner that supports mediation efforts and conflict prevention on the African continent. Madam President, since the establishment of the UN, the international community has recognized the central importance of mediation in maintaining international peace and security. Article 33 of the Charter stipulates that parties to any dispute, the continuation of which is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, they should seek a solution first of all by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, or other peaceful means. This provision confirms that mediation is not merely an optional tool, but a core component of the UN system for preventing and peacefully resolving conflicts. In this context, the UN Department of Political and Peace-Building Affairs plays a pivotal role in supporting mediation and preventive in building national and regional capacities in the field of mediation and conflict prevention. Egypt believes that strengthening the political, human, and financial resources allocated to these efforts is a necessary investment in conflict prevention that is far less costly than addressing their humanitarian, security, and economic consequences after they erupt. We also believe in the importance of investing in national and regional mediation capacities, including training mediators with the participation of women and youth, and drawing on local and traditional expertise in a manner that ensures the inclusiveness of political processes and the sustainability of their outcomes. The importance of mediation is more evident today than ever before in the light of the multiple crises and protracted conflicts across various regions of the world. From Middle East to Africa and Europe, current experiences confirm that military solutions cannot achieve sustainable peace. Ongoing efforts in the Gaza Strip, initiatives aimed at ending the conflict in Sudan, and initiatives concerning the Great Lakes region as a whole, particularly Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as other hotspots, underscore the urgent need to give mediation greater political priority within the UN system. In this context, Egyptian foreign policy has historically been closely associated with supporting dialogue, mediation, and peaceful settlement of disputes. Over decades, Egypt has contributed to bridging differences between conflicting parties in the Middle East and Africa, playing important roles in reaching understandings and ceasefire in Gaza Strip, supporting Palestinian reconciliation, and contributing to efforts to resolve crises in Libya, Sudan, and South Sudan. In addition to continuous support for African efforts to find African solutions for African problems. Drawing on this experience, Egypt concludes by calling for strengthening the position of mediation within the UN system, not only as a tool for crisis management, but as an integral part of comprehensive framework that includes preventive diplomacy, peace building, and sustainable development, thereby contributing to addressing the root causes of conflicts and preventing their recurrence. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
Vice President and distinguished colleagues, we appreciate this opportunity to underline Norway's strong commitment to peaceful conflict resolution in general, and the UN's collective role in these efforts in particular. The pursuit of peace is the core mandate of this organization. Equally important is the need to support and to strengthen the multilateral system to enable and processual support and design for peace efforts is central priority for Norway in the ongoing UN-80 reforms. President Norway has consistently expressed a strong support for the Secretary General's good offices anchored in UN Charter. The ability to protect and to advance this authority will be key also for the next role. Peace efforts cannot be measured solely by the conclusion of comprehensive peace agreements. Preventing escalation For the UN, this means safeguarding and strengthening capacities for prevention, mediation, and peace building. President, the UN has the tools, and Norway remains committed to collaborate and maintain our significant political and financial support. This includes continued support to DPPA through its multi-year appeal, to the UN Mediation Standby Team, the Peacebuilding Fund, the SPMs and all the envoys, and UNDP DPPA joint program and its competent peace and development advisors, and in many other ways. President, the regional level matters.
We emphasized the important and complementary roles that regional organizations and member states play in conflict resolution and mediation. In this regard, we would particularly like to recognize the African Union and the established AU-UN partnership. President, there is no substitute for lasting political solutions to armed conflict. This conviction guides our peace and conflict resolution efforts across regions and across conflicts. We also know that a meaningful The UN plays a key role in both crafting political solutions but not the least to ensure inclusive processes. Peace processes, which obviously is something positive and that we welcome. There is no substitute for the multilateral system and the UN's very unique role in providing role in ending armed conflicts. I thank you, Vice President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I now give
Madam President, Malaysia commends co-chairs Finland and Turkey for their continued leadership in advancing the cause of mediation within the United Nations His message was clear. These tools must be used fully and in good faith. Today's debate is an opportunity for us to reflect on why they are not used more often and more urgently to General. Security Council Resolution 2788 called on member states to support the Secretary General's mediation and preventive diplomacy efforts and encourage the Secretary General to ensure to fulfill this responsibility. We encourage member states to make this expectation clear in the selection process, including within the context of the ongoing UNAT reform. The message carries a different weight. Malaysia encourages efforts to deepen the cooperation between the UN and regional organizations as genuine and equal partners. It signals strongly to parties in conflict that the cost of rejecting mediation is high. Conversely, when the Council is divided, for peace. Madam President, the UN Charter, specifically Chapter 6, is clear. The responsibility to settle disputes by peaceful means is an obligation of peace. Malaysia reaffirms its commitment to the Charter, to multilateralism, and to the Pacific settlement of disputes. We will continue to work alongside all partners
Madam. Arabia remains committed to supporting international efforts debate on peace mediation and reaffirms its strong support for the central role of the United Nations in preventing and peaceful solution of conflicts. And security. The United Nations continues to play an indispensable role in facilitating dialogue, building trust among armed conflict, geopolitical tensions, humanitarian crises, forced displacement, food insecurity, and growing backdrop. The importance of effective mediation has never been greater. The United Nations must continue to strengthen its capacity to respond to emerging challenges, promoting dialogue among crises and safeguarding international peace and security for future generations. The Kingdom believes that successful mediation efforts require knowledge of local dynamics and can contribute significantly to increasing conditions conducive to dialogue and reconciliation. The Charter of the United Nations. Saudi Arabia has constantly supported initiatives
aimed at promoting dialogue, de-escalation, peaceful settlement of disputes, guided by its the root causes of conflict and reflect aspiration of affected populations. The Kingdom further underscores the importance of strengthening the effectiveness of the United Nations mediation by ensuring adequate resources, investing in preventive diplomacy. Finally, the Kingdom stands ready to work with all member states
Thank you, Madam President. Guatemala firmly aligns itself with the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter. We reiterate that preventive diplomacy, dialogue, and multilateralism must always be a priority over unilateral force, geopolitical interference, and aggression. Guatemala not only sees this as an issue of foreign policy, but we see it based on our historic experience. 3 decades ago, we put an end to 36 years of internal armed conflict through the historic peace agreements that were signed in 1996. This monumental achievement was possible thanks to prolonged negotiations under the auspices of the good offices of the Secretary General. Our history shows us that when the United Nations uses its mediation tools patiently, flexibly, and when it has sustained political support, including in the most deep-rooted conflicts, then it is possible to find a peaceful solution. After those agreements, we can now say that successful mediation and with the active participation of civil society. Today, we defend the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women at all stages local peace infrastructure. Effective mediation cannot just be a vertical process driven forward by the state. Genuine prevention of conflicts begins at the community level, and we're very grateful for the valuable support that the peacebuilding national mechanisms allow us to solve community disputes with regard to resources and land before they escalate. And based on that successful model, we would urge the international community and the Peacebuilding Fund to continue to provide this sustainable support. These traditional practices for solving conflicts can be used globally. Finally, international law. When bilateral mediation stagnates, courts represents the maximum expression of the commitment of a state to peace and the rule of law, internationally speaking. Madam President, strengthening the negotiated peace over violence, Guatemala would call upon all member states to reinvest in the diplomatic tools of this organization. We chose dialogue over confrontation
السيدة الرئيسة تتقدم مملكة البحرين.
Madam President, the settlement of disputes, conflict prevention and resolution. This is very important in the light of increasingly major conflicts that threaten international peace and security. We thank Turkey and Finland that mediation is a peaceful tool enshrined in Article 33 of the United Nations Charter. It is an effective tool for the prevention of conflicts as well as and restoring trust between states. These are essential principles for the success of any mediation efforts. Mediation's effectiveness requires a national ownership of the political process and the constructive involvement of all parties, as well as the involvement of the United Nations and regional organizations. We have made mediation and negotiation that trust and tolerance are an essential foundation when it comes to preventing conflict escalation. We believe that conflict prevention begins with addressing the root causes of these hand in hand with efforts towards sustainable development and upholding the rule of law in order to find lasting, sustainable solutions. We reiterate the importance of the role of the UN, including through the good offices of the Secretary General and his special envoys, as well as United cooperation with regional and sub-regional organizations pursuant to Chapter 8 of the Charter. These organizations understand national contexts and can bring concrete solutions. Madam President, despite efforts made by a number of countries to these attacks are unjustifiable. The principles of international law and the United Nations Charter must be respected. This includes the principles of good neighborliness and the non-interference in the internal affairs and respect for the sovereignty the safety of international trade must be guaranteed. This is pursuant to a number of relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2217, which the role of the United Nations in the context of mediation, as well as strengthening the participation of women and youth in order to achieve greater effectiveness. To conclude, we reiterate that mediation is an investment
the distinguished representative of Bahrain. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bangladesh.
Madam President, at the outset, let me thank you and the co-chairs, Finland and Turkey, for convening this important debate. Madam President, we meet at a moment when the international community is faced with conflicts and mistrust. Though Article 33 of the UN Charter gives us clear guidance for peaceful means, yet too often we see prevention. In this context, mediation remains a practical and cost-effective tool. Here, I'd like to highlight that since 1999, Bangladesh has been facilitating the annual GA resolution on a culture of peace, promoting tolerance, dialogue, solidarity, and non-violence. And durable solution through dialogue and engagement with Myanmar with the support of regional and international partners. The return of the Rohingyas to their homeland in Myanmar remains the only lasting solution. For this, mediation, confidence building, and coordinated international engagement remain indispensable. Madam President, as a member of the group of Friends on Mediation, allow me to highlight some key points here. First, mediation must be used early. Following the early warning, the good offices of the Secretary General, the Mediation Support Unit, Special Envoys, and regional are more durable when they reflect the voices of those most affected by conflict, including women, youth, and displaced communities. In this regard, through our national experience, we believe championing the women, peace, and security agenda can greatly strengthen the inclusive cause. Third, mediation must remain anchored in the values of UN Charter and international law, adding to the respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, humanitarian action, and sustainable development. As one of the largest contributors to UN peacekeeping, we believe that force deployments can stabilize situations, but durable peace requires continuous dialogue, ECOSOC, the Peace Building Commission, and other UN bodies in preventive diplomacy and peaceful settlement of disputes. We also attach importance on closer cooperation between the UN and regional organizations. Bangladesh remains committed to the ongoing work of the group and will extend its full support. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bangladesh. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers at a later date to be announced. The Assembly has thus concluded this stage of consideration of sub-item B of Agenda Item 31. The meeting is adjourned.
you.